Some choices don't feel like choices at all. They feel like the universe testing whether you're still human or whether poverty and grief have finally hollowed you out completely. Thomas Brennan discovered this truth on a frozen morning in March 1851, when two impossible women emerged from the fog like something out of a fever dream, and the decision he made in the next 60 seconds would either destroy him or prove he still had a soul worth saving. This is the story of what happened when desperation met conscience, when the law collided with mercy, and when three people discovered that sometimes the price of doing right is everything you have left to lose. The winter of 1851 had been merciless along the Kentucky-Ohio border. Snow fell in sheets for weeks, burying roads, killing livestock, and driving men to dark thoughts in darker cabins. Thomas Brennan's farm sat 4 miles south of Maysville, close enough to the Ohio River that you could hear the ice cracking on still nights, close enough to freedom that runaway slaves passed through regularly, and close enough to slave catchers that helping them could get you killed. Thomas was 31 years old and looked 50. Grief does that to a man. His wife Anna had died 18 months earlier, not from childbirth like so many women, but from something worse. A slow wasting sickness that took 6 months to kill her, 6 months of watching her fade, of holding her hand while she apologized for dying, as if her body's betrayal was somehow a moral failure. The baby, a son they'd named Samuel, had died 3 days after her. He was born too early, too small, too fragile for a world this cruel. Thomas had buried them together in a single grave on the hill behind the farmhouse. He'd carved their names into a piece of oak himself because he couldn't afford a proper stone. Anna Brennan, beloved wife. Samuel Brennan, beloved son. Gone to God's mercy. That last line was a lie. If God had mercy, he wouldn't take a good woman and an innocent child and leave a broken man alone with 40 acres he couldn't work and a future that stretched ahead like an empty road to nowhere. The farm was failing. Not slowly, not gradually, but in the spectacular way that happens when a man stops caring whether he lives or dies. The corn crop had rutted in the fields last fall because Thomas couldn't summon the energy to harvest it. The 2 cows he'd owned had been sold for drinking money. The chickens had been eaten or stolen by foxes he was too drunk to shoot. All that remained was the farmhouse itself, a sturdy structure his father had built 20 years ago, and $37 in debt to a merchant named Elias Cobb who was losing patience. Cobb had made his position clear 2 weeks ago. Pay by the end of March or lose the farm. Simple as that. Thomas had until March 31st. Today was March 18th. He had 13 days and no plan. No money. No prospects. Nothing but the growing certainty that maybe losing the farm wouldn't be the worst thing. Maybe it would be a mercy. Maybe he could just walk away from this place that held nothing but ghosts and memories of happiness, so complete it felt like a different lifetime. He'd thought about it seriously. Just leaving. Walking north across the frozen Ohio River into freedom of a different kind. Ohio was free territory. No slavery, no slave catchers, no complicity in the machinery of human suffering that powered Kentucky's economy. He could disappear there, start over, become someone new. Someone without a past. Someone who hadn't failed his wife by being unable to save her, failed his son by being unable to keep him alive, failed himself by being unable to do anything but drink and wait for the end. But he never left. Partly from cowardice, partly from the stubborn pride that ran in his family like a curse, partly because Anna was buried here, and leaving felt like abandoning her a second time. So he stayed. Stayed and drank. Stayed and watched the farm decay. Stayed and waited for whatever came next. March 18th, 1851, dawned gray and bitter. Thomas woke to frozen breath in his bedroom and ice on the inside of the windows. The fire had died overnight. He was too tired and too hungover to rebuild it immediately. He just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl around the house, wondering if today would be the day he finally found the courage to end it all. The rifle was in the corner. Loaded. Ready. It would be easy. Quick. Final. No more grief. No more debt. No more waking up to emptiness. Just darkness and whatever came after. If anything came after. But he didn't do it. He'd thought about it 100 times and never done it. Some deep animal part of his brain kept insisting on survival even when his conscious mind had given up. So instead of reaching for the rifle, he reached for the bottle. Whiskey for breakfast. The breakfast of men who'd stopped pretending they had a future. He drank until his hands stopped shaking, then forced himself upright. His body ached in that particular way that came from sleeping on a corn husk mattress in a freezing room when you were drunk the night before. Every joint protested. Every muscle felt like it had been beaten with a stick. He was 31 and felt ancient. He pulled on clothes that smelled of sweat and smoke, boots that were coming apart at the seams, and a coat that had belonged to his father. Then he stepped outside into a morning so cold it hurt to breathe. Fog hung over everything. Thick white fog that reduced visibility to maybe 30 feet. It rolled across the fields in waves, turning the world into something ghostly and uncertain. Thomas stood on his porch, breath clouding, and felt the peculiar loneliness that comes from being the only human being in a landscape that didn't care whether you lived or died. That's when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Not wind. Not animals. Something else. Human voices. Distant. Desperate. Coming from the direction of the main road. Thomas's first instinct was to ignore it. Whatever was happening wasn't his business. He'd learned that lesson hard over the past year. Mind your own troubles. Don't take on anyone else's. Survival meant keeping your head down and your door closed. But the voices kept coming. Closer now. And there was something about the tone. Not anger. Not violence. Fear. Pure existential fear. He moved toward the sound without making a conscious decision to do so. His body just started walking, drawn by curiosity or instinct or the last remaining shred of humanity he hadn't drowned in whiskey. He crossed his yard, moved through the broken fence line, and approached the tree line that bordered his property. The fog shifted, and that's when he saw them. 2 women. Running. Not the kind of running you do when you're late. The kind of running you do when death is chasing you. They burst from the fog like apparitions, and Thomas's mind struggled to process what his eyes were reporting because these women were impossible. They were giants. The first woman stood at least 6.5 feet tall, maybe 7. It was hard to judge in the fog, but she towered over everything around her. Broad-shouldered, powerful, moving with surprising speed despite her size. She wore the rough Osnaburg shift of a field slave, torn and filthy from hard travel. No shoes. Her feet were bleeding, leaving dark prints in the frost-covered ground. The second woman was even taller. 7 feet, easy. Maybe more. She ran with the unsteady gait of someone near complete collapse. Her sister, they had to be sisters, their features were too similar for anything else, kept a protective hand on her arm, guiding her, pulling her forward. Both women had skin the color of dark mahogany, faces that held the distinctive features of African ancestry, and eyes that carried the kind of terror that comes from being hunted like animals. Their shifts were soaked with sweat despite the freezing temperature. Their breath came in ragged gasps that misted white in the cold air. They'd been running for miles. Maybe days. They saw Thomas at the same moment he saw them. All 3 humans froze, caught in that terrible moment of mutual assessment. The women's eyes went wide with fear. Thomas's hand instinctively moved toward the knife on his belt. Not to threaten, just instinct. When you're confronted with the impossible, you reach for something solid. Please. The taller woman's voice was barely a whisper, raw from screaming or crying or both. Please help us. They're coming. Thomas understood immediately. Runaways. These were escaped slaves, and whoever owned them was coming. Coming fast. Coming with dogs and guns and the full weight of the law behind them. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 had made it a federal crime to help runaways. 6 months in prison. $1,000 fine. Property seizure. Social destruction. Everything he had left would be taken. He should turn them in. The reward for catching runaways this unusual would be substantial. Women this size would be valuable. Exotic. Expensive property. Their owner would pay handsomely for their return. Enough to clear his debts. Enough to save his farm. Enough to give him a future instead of this slow slide into oblivion. Behind the women, barely visible through the fog, Thomas heard dogs. The deep baying of hunting hounds. Close. Getting closer. The slave catchers were minutes away. Maybe less. The women heard them too. The shorter one, though shorter meant 6.5 feet, turned toward the sound, her body tensing like a cornered animal's. She was ready to run or fight. Probably both. The taller one just stood there, swaying, her eyes pleading with Thomas to make the choice that would either save them or condemn them. Every second he stood, there was a second closer to discovery. If the slave catchers found them on his property, he'd be implicated regardless of what he did. But if he helped them, actively aided their escape, he'd be committing a crime that would destroy him. And if he turned them in, he'd have to live with himself afterward. Live with the knowledge that he'd sold human beings back into bondage for $37 in debt relief. The dogs were louder now. Thomas could hear men's voices, shouting to each other, organizing a search pattern. They'd be here in minutes. He had to decide. Right now. This instant. He looked at the two women standing in his field, bleeding and terrified and impossibly tall, and thought about Anna. What would she have done? He knew the answer immediately. Anna would have helped. No hesitation. No calculation. She would have seen suffering and responded to it because that's who she was. That's who he used to be, before grief hollowed him out. Maybe he could be that person again. Just once. Just for today. Bon. Thomas's voice came out harsh, urgent. Now. Don't argue. Move. The women didn't need to be told twice. They ran, and Thomas ran with them, leading them across his yard toward the barn. It was a small structure, weathered gray, half collapsed on one side, but it had a loft filled with old hay. A hiding place. Not a great one, but something. They reached the barn just as Thomas heard horses on the road. The slave catchers were at his property line. They'd be at his door in seconds. He shoved the women toward the ladder, motioned frantically for them to climb. The shorter woman went first, moving with surprising agility despite her exhaustion. The taller one struggled, her strength nearly gone, but her sister reached down and literally pulled her up by her arms. Thomas scattered hay over them, working fast, making sure they were completely covered. Then he climbed down, swept away the bloody footprints they'd left on the barn floor, and stepped outside just as 4 riders appeared through the fog. The lead rider was a man Thomas recognized. Jacob Marsh, a slave catcher who worked the Ohio border like a wolf worked a flock. He was in his 40s, lean and weathered, with eyes that had gone dead years ago. The kind of dead that came from doing ugly work for so long you forgot what clean hands felt like. He carried a rifle across his saddle and a coiled whip on his belt. The other 3 men were younger, harder, armed with pistols and the casual violence of men who'd never faced consequences for cruelty. Marsh reined in his horse 10 feet from where Thomas stood. The horse's breath steamed in the cold air. The dogs, 3 massive bloodhounds, strained at their leashes, noses to the ground, pulling toward the barn with single-minded intensity. They knew. They could smell the women, could smell fear and sweat and bleeding feet. It was only a matter of seconds before Marsh realized where the trail led. Morning, Brennan. Marsh's voice was conversational, almost friendly. That's what made him dangerous. He could sound reasonable while doing unreasonable things. Seen anyone pass through here this morning? Thomas kept his face neutral, his voice steady. Just woke up. Haven't seen anyone. Why? Looking for property. 2 Negro women. Runaways from the McAllister plantation down in Bourbon County. Been tracking them for 2 days. Trail leads right through your land. Thomas shrugged, trying to project indifference he didn't feel. His heart was hammering so hard he was certain Marsh could hear it. Haven't seen them. But I've been inside. Could have passed by without me noticing. Marsh studied him for a long moment. The dogs kept pulling toward the barn, whining, agitated. One of the younger slave catchers, a red-haired man with a scar across his nose, spoke up. Dogs don't lie, Marsh. They smell something. Probably rats. Thomas gestured toward the barn. Barn's falling apart. Got rats big as cats living in there. Dogs probably smell them. Marsh's eyes narrowed. Mind if we look? Yes, I mind. This is my property. You don't have permission to search it. The Fugitive Slave Act says otherwise. Marsh's voice lost its friendly edge. Says I can search any property when I'm in pursuit of fugitives. Says you have to cooperate. Says if you obstruct me, you're committing a federal crime. Now, we can do this easy or we can do this hard. Your choice. Thomas's mind raced. He couldn't stop them from searching. If he tried, they'd know he was hiding something. The dogs were already pointing at the barn like arrows. In 30 seconds, they'd find the women. Game over. Unless. Fine. Search. But make it quick. I've got work to do. He said it with just enough resentment to sound authentic. A poor farmer annoyed at being bothered, not a criminal hiding fugitives. Then he did something that surprised even himself. He walked toward the barn ahead of Marsh, moving with purpose, as if he had nothing to hide. Marsh dismounted, handed his reins to one of the other men, and followed. The dogs came with him, pulling so hard their handler struggled to keep them controlled. Thomas pushed open the barn door, stepped inside, and made a show of looking around. See, nothing. Just hay and rats and a lot of empty space. The dogs went insane. They surged forward, dragging their handler toward the ladder, baying and barking with the certainty of animals who'd found their quarry. Marsh looked at Thomas, then at the loft, then back at Thomas. His hand moved to his pistol. What's up there? Hey. Old farm equipment. Told you, rats. Your dogs are probably smelling rats. Marsh walked to the ladder, put his boot on the first rung. Thomas's stomach dropped. This was it. The moment everything ended. He'd gambled and lost. They'd find the women. Marsh would arrest all three of them. Thomas would lose everything. The farm. His freedom. His life, probably. They hanged abolitionists sometimes. Made examples of them. But then something unexpected happened. A massive rat, easily a foot long from nose to tail, scurried across the loft floor above them. It appeared in the opening, silhouetted against the dim light from the loft window, and squeaked indignantly at being disturbed. Then another rat appeared. Then a third. They'd been nesting up there, and the women's presence had driven them out. Marsh paused, his boot still on the ladder rung. He looked up at the rats, looked at the dogs going crazy, looked at Thomas, standing there with studied indifference. The calculation played across his face. The dogs smelled something. Could be the women. Could be rats. Could be both. But climbing into a rat-infested loft to check seemed beneath him. Seemed like the kind of dirty work you made younger men do. Davies. Marsh gestured to the red-haired man. Get up there. Check it out. Davies didn't look happy about it, but he climbed. Thomas watched him ascend, watched him disappear into the loft, and silently prayed to a God he'd stopped believing in 18 months ago. Please. If you're there. If you ever cared about mercy or justice or anything good. Please. He heard Davies moving around above them. Heard hay rustling. Heard the man curse as rats scattered. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Davies's head appeared in the opening. Nothing but hay and rats. Hundreds of the damn things. He climbed down, brushing straw from his clothes. His face twisted with disgust. Whatever was here is long gone. Trail probably goes past the barn, not into it. Marsh stood there, clearly torn. His instincts told him something was wrong. The dogs were never wrong. But the evidence suggested an empty barn and an annoyed farmer and rats. Sometimes, Thomas realized, men saw what they expected to see. Expected runaways to be stupid, to make obvious mistakes. Didn't expect them to hide in plain sight while rats scurried around them. Didn't expect a paw-drunk farmer to risk everything for strangers. We'll search the house. Marsh's voice was harder now, aggressive. If you're lying, Brennan, if you're hiding them, I'll see you hang. Search it. Thomas led them to the house, moving with the resigned frustration of a man who had nothing to hide and resented the imposition. Inside, Marsh and his men went through everything. They checked under the bed, behind the curtains, in the root cellar, in every corner and crevice. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find. The women were still in the barn, hidden under hay, surrounded by rats, barely breathing. After 20 minutes, Marsh gave up. He stood in Thomas's kitchen, his frustration visible, and made one last attempt. There's a reward. $300 for each woman. $600 total. That's more than your farm is worth, Brennan. That's enough to change your life. You sure you haven't seen them? Thomas looked him dead in the eye. I'm sure. Now get off my property. Marsh held his gaze for 5 long seconds. Then he nodded slowly, turned, and walked out. His men followed. Thomas stood at the door, watching them mount their horses, watching them ride away into the fog, watching until they were completely out of sight. Only then did his legs start shaking. Only then did he allow himself to feel the terror that had been building since the moment he saw those two impossible women running through his field. He waited another 30 minutes. Made sure Marsh wasn't coming back. Made sure the coast was clear. Then he returned to the barn. "You can come down now. They are gone." The hay shifted, and slowly, carefully, the two women emerged. They were covered in straw and dust and rat droppings, but they were alive. The shorter one, though shorter was relative when she was 6.5 feet tall, climbed down first, moving stiffly. The taller one followed, so weak she nearly fell from the ladder. Thomas caught her, his hands barely able to support her weight. She was massive, solid, and completely exhausted. They stood there in his barn, three people who'd just survived something impossible, and nobody spoke for a long moment. Finally, the shorter woman broke the silence. "Why did you help us?" Thomas didn't have a good answer. Didn't have any answer that made sense. "I don't know. Maybe because I'm tired of being the kind of man who doesn't. Maybe because my wife would have. Maybe because I already lost everything that mattered. So what's a farm?" The woman studied him with intelligent eyes. Eyes that had seen too much and expected too little. "My name is Grace. This is my sister Hope." Grace and Hope. The irony wasn't lost on Thomas. Two women named for virtues they'd probably never been allowed to possess. Running toward freedom they might never reach. But he didn't say that. He just nodded. "Thomas Brennan. You're both injured. Your feet. We've been running for 5 days." Hope's voice was weak, barely audible. "From Bourbon County. 60 miles, give or take. 60 miles barefoot in winter." Thomas couldn't imagine it. Couldn't imagine the pain, the determination, the sheer force it will require to keep moving when your body was screaming at you to stop. And Hope looked like she'd reached the end of that will. Her eyes were glossy with fever. Her breathing was labored. She needed rest, needed warmth, needed medical attention she'd never receive. "Come inside. Both of you. I'll get food, water, and something for those feet." Grace shook her head. "Too dangerous. If they come back, they won't come back today. They think they lost the trail. But you're right. You can't stay long. Where are you headed?" "Ohio. Across the river. There are conductors in Ripley. Underground Railroad. They'll help us get to Canada." Ripley was 15 miles north. The Ohio River was frozen but not solid. Crossing it would be dangerous even for healthy people. For Hope in her condition, it would be suicide. "Your sister can barely stand. She's not going to make it 15 miles. She has to." Grace's voice carried absolute conviction. "We didn't come this far to give up now. We didn't survive what we survived just to turn back." "What did you survive?" Grace's jaw tightened. Her hands, Thomas noticed for the first time, were scarred. Old scars laid with new wounds. The kind of scars that came from field work and beatings and years of systematic violence. "Our master died 6 months ago. His son inherited the plantation. He decided we were too expensive to keep. Not enough work to justify feeding 2 women who eat as much as 3 normal women. He was going to sell us. Separately." The word separately hung in the air, like a death sentence. Thomas understood. Sisters. Twins, probably, given how similar they looked. Selling them separately meant destroying the only family they had. Meant condemning them to lives of isolation among strangers in places they'd never see each other again. "We couldn't let that happen." Hope spoke now, her voice stronger, fueled by anger that overrode exhaustion. "We're all we have. The only blood family either of us has left. They were going to split us up, send Grace to Louisiana and me to Mississippi. We'd have died never knowing if the other one was alive or dead or suffering. So we ran." Grace finished the thought. "The night before the auction. Stole food, stole blankets, and headed north. We've been running ever since." Thomas led them into the house. He knew it was dangerous, knew every minute they stayed was a minute closer to discovery, but he couldn't leave them in the barn. Not when Hope looked ready to collapse. Not when they'd just survived being hunted like animals. Inside, he got them water. They drank like they'd been wandering the desert, desperate, grateful gulps that spoke of days with limited access to anything clean or safe. Then he brought out what food he had. Not much. Stale bread. Some salt pork. Dried apples. They ate it all, eating with the mechanical efficiency of people who'd learned to take food when they could because they never knew when the next meal would come. While they ate, Thomas examined Hope's feet. They were destroyed, completely shredded from running on frozen ground. He could see bone in some places. Infection had already set in, red streaks running up her ankles. She needed a doctor. But doctors asked questions, and questions meant exposure. He did what he could. Washed the wounds with clean water, applied what little salve he had, tore up one of his own shirts to make bandages. It wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough. But it was something. As he worked, Grace watched him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Suspicion mixed with gratitude mixed with the bone-deep wariness of someone who'd learned never to trust white men's kindness because it always came with a price. "What do you want from us?" she asked finally. "Men don't help for free. What's your price?" Thomas sat back, surprised by the question. Then he realized she was right to ask. In her experience, help came with expectations. Usually ugly ones. White men who helped runaway slave women usually expected payment in forms that made Thomas's stomach turn. "Nothing. I want nothing. Just for you to get to Ohio alive. Just for you to make it to freedom." Grace didn't look convinced. "Nobody risks everything for nothing. My wife died," Thomas heard himself say. 18 months ago. Her and our son. I buried them on the hill behind this house. Since then, I've been waiting to die, too. Waiting for something to matter again. Maybe helping you matters. Maybe it's the first thing that's mattered since I put them in the ground." It was more truth than he'd intended to share. More vulnerability than he'd shown anyone since Anna's funeral. But something about these two women, these impossible giants who'd walked 60 miles on bleeding feet for the chance at freedom, made him want to be honest. Made him want to be the person Anna had believed he was. Grace's expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry for yours." They sat in silence for a moment. Three people who'd lost everything, sitting in a drafting house, bound together by circumstance and desperation and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, doing right could still matter in a world that seemed designed to reward cruelty. Then came the knock at the door. 3 sharp raps. Authoritative. Demanding. Thomas's blood ran cold. Marsh was back. Grace and Hope froze. Grace's hand moved instinctively toward a piece of firewood by the hearth. A weapon. Hope tried to stand, but her legs buckled. She was too weak. If Marsh had returned with his men, this was over. There'd be no hiding, no clever lies, no escape. Just capture and everything that came after. Thomas motioned for them to move toward the back room. A small storage area off the kitchen. Not much of a hiding place, but better than being in plain sight. The women moved as quietly as they could, Hope leaning heavily on Grace, both of them disappearing behind the door just as Thomas reached the front entrance. He opened it expecting Marsh's dead eyes and loaded rifle. Instead, he found a black man. He was middle-aged, maybe 50, dressed in clothes that suggested means. A wool coat, good boots, a hat that had been expensive once. His face carried the weathered dignity of someone who'd survived things that would have broken lesser men. But what struck Thomas most were his eyes. They held knowledge, authority, and something else. Desperation wrapped in composure. "Mr. Brennan?" The man's voice was educated, northern accent. Not Kentucky. Not southern at all. Thomas nodded, too surprised to speak. "My name is Isaiah Freeman. I'm a conductor on the Underground Railroad. I believe you have 2 passengers who need transport north." Thomas's mind reeled. How did this man know? How had he found them so fast? Was this a trap? Some elaborate scheme by Marsh to get a confession? Isaiah seemed to read his suspicion. "The women you're hiding. Grace and Hope. They were supposed to meet me 3 days ago at a station in Paris. When they didn't arrive, I came looking. Been following Marsh and his men, staying just far enough back they don't see me. Saw them leave your farm. Saw the way they were frustrated. Figure that means the women are here, and you help them hide." Thomas glanced back toward the storage room, then at Isaiah. "You're risking a lot coming here in daylight. So are you, hiding them. So are they, running. We all risking everything, Mr. Brennan. That's what freedom costs. Everything. Now, are they here or not?" Grace emerged from the storage room before Thomas could answer. She'd heard the conversation. Her eyes locked on Isaiah, searching for recognition, for confirmation that he was who he claimed to be. Isaiah's face broke into a relieved smile. Grace. Thank God. Where's your sister? Hope stepped out, moving slowly, painfully. Isaiah's smile vanished when he saw her condition. She can't travel like this. His assessment was immediate, professional. She's got fever, infected wounds, probably pneumonia from the sound of that breathing. Moving her now would kill her faster than the slave catchers would. We don't have a choice, Grace said. They'll come back. They'll search more thoroughly. We have to keep moving. You'd make it half a mile before she collapsed. Then you'd both be caught. Isaiah looked at Thomas. She needs rest. Days of it. Maybe a week. Clean water, warm food, actual medical care. You got a doctor, nearby who'd help? Thomas shook his head. Doc Hartley in town won't treat runaways. He'd turn them in first, then send his bill. Then we have a problem. Isaiah's voice was grim. He walked to Hope, examined her feet with gentle expertise, listened to her breathing, felt her forehead. When he looked up, his expression was grave. This woman needs a week of bed rest minimum. But staying here longer than tonight is suicide. Marsh will come back. Maybe not today, but soon. And when he does, he'll bring more men, better dogs, and a federal marshal's warrant. What are you suggesting? Thomas asked. Isaiah was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he spoke slowly, carefully. There might be a way. It's dangerous. It's probably illegal in ways I haven't even thought through. But it might work. What way? Isaiah turned to Thomas. How much debt are you carrying? The question caught Thomas off guard. What? Your farm. Word in town is you owe money. How much? Thomas felt defensive, exposed. That's my business. It becomes everyone's business when federal marshals start asking questions about who'd be desperate enough to help runaways. Men in debt are vulnerable. Vulnerable men do desperate things. So I'll ask again. How much? $37. Thomas said it quietly, ashamed of how small the number was, ashamed that such a trivial amount had him on the brink of losing everything. Isaiah nodded. And the reward for these two women is $300 each. $600 total. Thomas felt sick. If you're suggesting I turn them in, I'm suggesting the opposite. Isaiah's voice was calm, measured. I'm suggesting we use that reward as leverage. How? Isaiah pulled a chair from the table, sat down, and gestured for Thomas to do the same. Grace helped Hope to another chair. All four of them sat in the small kitchen, and Isaiah laid out a plan so audacious, so risky, so impossible that for a moment Thomas thought he was joking. Here's what we do. You turn them in. Grace stood up so fast her chair fell backward. Like hell he will. Let me finish. Isaiah's voice was steady. You turn them in. You collect the reward. But before you do, we make a deal with Marsh. What kind of deal? Thomas asked. Isaiah leaned forward. Marsh is a businessman. He gets paid for returning runaways, but he gets paid whether they're healthy or dead. Actually, he gets paid more if they are alive and functional because the owner can put them back to work. Dead slaves are losses. But sick slaves? Slaves so damaged they can't work? Those are liabilities. The owner still has to feed them, house them, and get nothing back. Sometimes it's easier to write them off than recover them. Where are you going with this? Hope can't travel, can't work, can barely walk. If Marsh takes her back in this condition, the McAllister family will be furious. They'll have paid the reward for a woman who might die before she's even worth the cost of keeping her alive. That reflects badly on Marsh. Damages his reputation. And reputation is everything in his line of work. So, Grace's voice was hard, suspicious. So, we offer him an alternative. Isaiah looked at Thomas. You negotiate. You tell Marsh you found the women. You're willing to turn them in. But you want to do it right. You want Hope healthy enough to survive the return trip. You offer to keep them here, under guard, while Hope recovers. Say it's for Marsh's benefit. Protecting his investment. Ensuring he doesn't have to explain to the McAllisters why he returned damaged goods. That's insane. Thomas couldn't believe what he was hearing. Why would Marsh agree to that? Because you'll offer him something he wants more than the women. Isaiah paused for effect. Information. Names. Routes. Other conductors on the Underground Railroad. Thomas felt the room spin. You want me to pretend to be an informant? Not pretend. You'll give him real information. Just not the information that matters. You'll give him the names of stations that have already been abandoned. Routes that were used last year but aren't active anymore. Conductors who've moved or died or retired. You'll give him just enough truth mixed with useless details to make it seem valuable. And what do I get? Time. Isaiah's voice was quiet. Every day Marsh thinks you're cooperating is a day Hope gets to heal. Every piece of false information you feed him is another day she grows stronger. We keep this going for a week, maybe 10 days. Long enough for Hope to recover. Then, when she can travel, we run again. Grace finished the thought. Her eyes were sharp, calculating. It could work. If Brennan's convincing enough. If Marsh believes him. That's a lot of IFS. Thomas stood, paced the small kitchen. And what happens when Marsh realizes I've been lying? When he figures out the information is worthless. You'll be long gone. Isaiah stood too. I can get you to Ohio. Get you set up with people who'll help you start over. The farm's lost anyway, right? You said yourself you're going to lose it to debt. This way, at least you lose it for something that matters. Thomas looked at the three people in his kitchen. A conductor on the Underground Railroad proposing an insane scheme. Two runaway slaves who trusted him with their lives. And himself, a broken drunk farmer who'd stopped believing anything mattered. This is the craziest thing I've ever heard. Isaiah smiled slightly. Crazy enough to work. Crazy enough to save 3 lives instead of destroying them. Yours included. Thomas walked to the window, looked out at his failing farm. The fields he'd let go to seed. The barn falling apart. The grave on the hill where Anna and Samuel lay buried. He'd been waiting to die for 18 months. Waiting for something to matter. Maybe this was it. Maybe the last meaningful thing he'd ever do was lie to a slave catcher to save 2 women he'd known for 4 hours. He turned back to Isaiah. If I do this, if I agree to this insane plan, you promise you'll get them to Canada? Both of them? I promise. Isaiah's voice carried conviction. I've been running this route for 12 years. Moved over 300 people to freedom. I don't lose passengers. Not if I can help it. And me? After this is over? After Marsh figures out I lied? You come with us. You start over. Ohio first, then maybe further west. Maybe California. Anywhere that isn't here. Anywhere you can be the man your wife believed you were. Thomas felt something break inside him. Some barrier he'd built around his grief. Anna would have done this. No hesitation. She would have seen 2 suffering human beings and responded with everything she had. Maybe that's what love meant. Not the love between husband and wife, but the bigger love. The love that saw suffering and couldn't look away. All right. His voice was steady. I'll do it. Tell me exactly how this works. Isaiah spent the next hour laying out the plan in detail. Thomas would ride to Maysville, find Marsh, and tell him he'd found the women. He'd play it careful. Say he saw them after Marsh left, tried to capture them himself for the reward, realized Hope was too sick to move safely. He'd offer to keep them secured at his farm while Hope recovered, in exchange for a share of the reward and immunity from prosecution for the delay in reporting them. The genius of the plan was that it played to Marsh's greed and practical nature. Marsh would get healthy merchandise to return, would save himself the embarrassment of delivering damaged goods, and would get intelligence about the Underground Railroad. He'd probably agree. Probably. And if he doesn't? Thomas asked. Then we run tonight, sick or not, and hope we make it to the river before they catch us. Isaiah's voice was grim. But I think he will. Men like Marsh are predictable. They care about money and reputation. We're offering to protect both. Grace had been quiet during the planning. Now she spoke. Why are you doing this, Mr. Brennan? Really? Not the story about your wife. The real reason. Thomas thought about it. Tried to find words for something he didn't fully understand himself. I've been dead for 18 months. Walking around, breathing, but dead inside. Maybe I'm tired of being dead. Maybe helping you means I'm still alive. Still human. still capable of doing something that matters instead of just waiting for the end. That's the real reason. Because if I don't help you, if I turn you in or let you go and tell myself it's not my problem, then I really am dead. Then Anna died for nothing and Samuel died for nothing, and the last 18 months of drinking and rutting and waiting were all there is. This way, at least I did one thing right before the end. Hope spoke, her voice weak but clear. You're a good man, Mr. Brennan. No, I'm not. But maybe I can do one good thing. Maybe that's enough. Isaiah stood. Then let's make it happen. Thomas, you ride to Maysville. Find Marsh. Make the offer. I'll stay here with Grace and Hope, keep them hidden. If Marsh agrees, you bring him back here tomorrow. We'll stage a scene. Make it look like they're secured. Make it look like you're cooperating. Then we play it out for as many days as we can get. And if someone else comes looking? Grace asked. If the McAllisters send their own men? Isaiah's face hardened. Then we adapt. We always adapt. That's how you survive on the railroad. You expect the plan to fall apart and you adapt. Thomas saddled his horse, an old man named Bell who was nearly as worn out as he was. As he prepared to leave, Grace approached him. She pressed something into his hand. A small cloth bundle. What's this? Open it when you're alone. It's not much, but it's all we have to offer. Thomas wanted to refuse, but the look in her eyes stopped him. This wasn't charity. This was dignity. The dignity of paying your own way, of not being reduced to helpless victims dependent on white charity. He took the bundle, nodded, and rode toward Maysville. The town was 6 miles away. As he rode, Thomas opened the bundle. Inside were 3 silver coins. Not much, maybe $2 total. But to women who owned nothing, who'd been property their entire lives, who'd stolen these coins from somewhere along their journey, this represented everything. It represented agency, choice, the ability to repay kindness instead of just receiving it. Thomas closed his hand around the coins and felt something he hadn't felt in 18 months. Purpose. He found Marsh at the tavern, drinking with his men, still frustrated from the morning's failed search. When Thomas walked in, Marsh's hand moved to his pistol. Easy. Thomas raised his hands. I'm not here for trouble. I'm here to make a deal. Marsh's eyes narrowed. What kind of deal? The kind that makes us both rich. Thomas sat down uninvited. You were right this morning. The women were on my property. In fact, they are still there. The tavern went quiet. Marsh's men reached for their weapons. Marsh himself went very still, the stillness of a predator about to strike. You lied to me. I protected my interests. Thomas kept his voice calm. You offered $600. That's life-changing money for a man in my position. But I'm not stupid. I know the law says I have to help you. I also know that if I just hand them over, I get nothing but thanks. So yes, I lied. I wanted time to think about how to handle this properly. You're admitting to a federal crime. I'm offering you a solution. Thomas leaned forward. One of those women is sick. Badly sick. Fever, infection, can barely walk. If you take her now, she'll probably die before you get her back to Bourbon County. The McAllisters will blame you. They'll say you damaged their property. Your reputation suffers. Marsh's jaw tightened. What's your proposal? Let me keep them at my farm. Under guard. Under your supervision if you want. Give the sick one a week to recover. Feed her, treat her wounds, get her healthy enough to survive the journey. When she's well, I turn them both over. You get healthy merchandise to return. The McAllisters are happy. Your reputation stays intact. And I get a portion of the reward for my trouble and cooperation. Marsh studied him. Why would I agree to this? Why not just take them now? Because you're a professional, and professionals think long-term. Thomas was making it up as he went, but the words came easily. You could take them now. Drag a dying woman 60 miles and hope she survives. Or you could wait a week, return healthy property, and look like a man who knows how to protect an investment. Which version makes you look better to your next client? The logic was sound. Thomas could see Marsh considering it, weighing risks against rewards. Finally, Marsh spoke. What else do you want? Thomas took a breath. This was the dangerous part. Information. I want immunity from prosecution for harboring them. full immunity, in writing. And I want it known that I cooperated, that I helped recover valuable property. Marsh's eyes glittered. You want credit. Want people to know you're not one of those abolitionist sympathizers. Exactly. Thomas forced himself to meet Marsh's gaze. I'm a practical man. I need money and I need respect in this community. Turning in runaways gets me both. I don't care about politics or morality. I care about survival. It was the most convincing lie Thomas had ever told, because it was exactly what men like Marsh expected to hear. Poor white farmers were supposed to be self-interested, supposed to side with slavery because it was profitable. Marsh understood that language, trusted it. All right. Marsh stood. Here's my counteroffer. You keep them for 5 days. Not a week. 5 days. I'll post a man at your farm to ensure they don't escape. On day 6, I take them back, healthy or not. You get $100. Not half the reward, $100. And you give me something else. What? Names. Routes. Information about the Underground Railroad in this area. I know you've seen things, heard things. Poor farmers always do. You're beneath notice, so people talk around you. You tell me what you know, and I'll make sure your cooperation is well documented. Make sure people know you're loyal. Thomas's stomach churned, but he nodded. Deal. I'll tell you what I know. And if those women escape while they're in your custody, if they disappear or die or turn out to not be who you say they are, I'll see you hang. Clear. Crystal. They shook hands. Thomas felt like he was shaking hands with the devil himself, but it was done. The deal was made. He had 5 days to save 2 lives and lose everything he'd ever known. As he rode back to the farm, the weight of what he'd just agreed to settled on his shoulders like a physical thing. He'd just promised to betray the Underground Railroad. Promised to inform on people who were risking everything to help others. Even if the information was false, even if Isaiah had assured him it wouldn't hurt anyone, Thomas felt the stain of it. But he also felt something else. Hope. Real hope. The kind he hadn't felt since Anna died. 5 days. They had 5 days to make this work. 5 days for hope to heal. 5 days to prepare for an escape that would change all their lives forever. He just had to hold his nerve. Had to play the role of the greedy, self-interested farmer convincingly enough that Marsh never suspected the truth. Had to become a liar so good that he could look a slave catcher in the eye and make him believe that turning in runaways was just business. Thomas Brennan had spent 18 months wanting to die. Now, riding back to his farm with the weight of 3 lives on his shoulders, he'd never felt more alive. The sun was setting as he reached home. Isaiah met him at the door. How did it go? Thomas told him everything. The 5-day timeline. The guard Marsh would post. The demand for information. As he spoke, he saw Isaiah's expression shift from concern to calculation to grim satisfaction. 5 days. Isaiah nodded slowly. We can work with 5 days. It's tight, but we can work with it. What about the guard? We'll handle him. Keep him comfortable. Keep him bored. Keep him believing everything's under control. Men get sloppy when they are bored. And the information I promised? We'll feed Marsh exactly what we planned. Old routes. Dead drops that haven't been used in a year. Names of conductors who've moved on. Enough truth to seem credible. Enough lies to be worthless. Isaiah gripped Thomas's shoulder. You did good. You bought us time. Now we use it. Thomas went inside. Grace and Hope was sitting by the fire. Hope bundled in blankets, color returning to her cheeks now that she was warm and fed. They both looked at him with expressions that mixed hope and fear. We have 5 days, Thomas said simply. Then we're run. Grace nodded. Then we make them count. And for the first time in 18 months, sitting in his drafty cabin with 2 runaway slaves and a conductor on the Underground Railroad, planning an escape that would probably get them all killed, Thomas Brennan smiled. The guard's name was William Porter, and he was 23 years old with soft hands and softer convictions. Marsh had chosen poorly, selecting a young man eager to prove himself but lacking the hardness required for the job. Thomas recognized this within an hour of Porter's arrival and understood immediately that this was a gift. Porter arrived at dawn on the 2nd day, riding a bay horse and carrying a rifle he clearly wasn't comfortable with. He was polite, almost apologetic, as if he understood the awkwardness of the situation. Marsh sent me to keep watch. Make sure the women don't escape. He said you were cooperating, but, well, orders are orders. I understand. Thomas gestured toward the barn. I've got them secured in there, fed and watered. The sick one's improving, but slowly. Porter nodded, glanced toward the barn, then back at Thomas. I'll need to see them. Verify they're who Marsh says they are. Of course. Thomas led him to the barn, where Grace and Hope sat in the loft, exactly where they were supposed to be. Isaiah had left before dawn, slipping away into the pre-dawn darkness to avoid being seen. The plan was for him to return on the fifth night, when they'd make their escape. Grace and Hope played their roles perfectly. They sat quietly, heads down, projecting the defeated exhaustion of captured runaways who'd accepted their fate. Hope's acting was made easier by the fact that she genuinely was still weak, though improving hourly with rest and food. Grace radiated barely suppressed fury, which was exactly what Porter would expect from a woman who'd been caught after running 60 miles. Porter stared at them with open-mouthed amazement. My God, they really are giants. I thought Marsh was exaggerating, but they are tall. Thomas's voice was flat, bored. Makes them valuable. Makes this whole arrangement worth my while. Right. Yes. Porter tore his gaze away from the women. Marsh said you'd be providing information. About the railroad. This was the crucial part. The lie that had to be convincing enough to keep Marsh invested in the arrangement. Thomas had spent the previous night with Isaiah, memorizing names and routes that were outdated or fictional. Now he delivered them with the careful precision of a man who'd been paying attention, but wasn't quite sure of all the details. There's a Quaker family about 30 miles northwest. The Hendersons. They run a station. Or they did. I heard they moved last year, but the house might still be used. And there's a free black settlement near Ripley. Called itself New Zion or New Hope or something biblical. That's where runaways head when they cross the river. It was all true. It was also all useless. The Hendersons had indeed moved, and their house had been abandoned for 8 months. The settlement Isaiah came from had 3 different names depending on who you asked, and its exact location was deliberately vague. Thomas was giving Marsh information that sounded valuable but would lead nowhere. Porter wrote it down in a small notebook, his handwriting careful and neat. What else? There's a conductor. Black man, maybe 50, goes by the name of Freeman. Heard he operates out of Paris, helps people cross into Ohio. Thomas was gambling here, giving Marsh Isaiah's real name, but the wrong location. Isaiah didn't operate out of Paris anymore. He'd moved his base of operations 6 months ago. If Marsh investigated, he'd find old rumors that confirmed a conductor named Freeman, but the trail would be cold. Porter finished writing, then looked uncomfortable. Marsh said I'm to stay here. Watch the property. Make sure nothing goes wrong. There's a spare room in the house. Small, but it's warm. Thomas was already walking back toward the cabin. You're welcome to it. I'll bring you meals. Over the next 4 days, a strange routine developed. Porter spent his time mostly sitting on Thomas's porch, rifle across his lap, watching the barn with the vigilance of a young man trying to prove he could be trusted with responsibility. Thomas played the role of the cooperative host, bringing Porter meals, making small talk, gradually building a rapport that made Porter drop his guard. Meanwhile, in the barn, Hope healed. Not completely. Her feet were still tender. Her breathing still carried a faint rattle, but she improved enough to stand without swaying, to walk without collapsing, to speak without her voice breaking into painful coughs. Grace tended to her with fierce devotion, and Thomas brought them food 3 times a day, always under Porter's watchful eye. But what Porter didn't see were the moments when Thomas lingered in the barn, ostensibly checking on his prisoners, actually planning the escape. What Porter didn't know was that every conversation about feed and weather and farm work was actually coded discussion about timing and routes and contingencies. On the 3rd day, Thomas asked Porter a question that seemed casual but was actually calculated. You ever think about what happens to them after they go back? Porter shifted uncomfortably. I try not to think about it. It's not my business what happens after I do my job. Must be hard though. Seeing people who ran for freedom, knowing they are going back to, what? Beatings? Being sold? Separated? They are property. Porter's voice carried the rote certainty of a man repeating words he'd been taught to believe. It's the law. Property has to be returned to its rightful owner. You really believe that? Or do you just tell yourself that so you can sleep at night? Porter was quiet for a long moment. Then, quietly, what I believe doesn't matter. The law is the law. The law said Anna and Samuel dying was God's will. Thomas's voice was bitter. The law said I had to pay taxes on land I couldn't farm while my wife was dying. The law says a lot of things that don't make them right. Porter didn't respond. But Thomas saw something flicker in his eyes. Doubt. The kind of doubt that could be exploited. On the fourth day, Marsh returned to check on progress. He examined Hope with the clinical detachment of a man assessing livestock, nodded with satisfaction at her improvement, and pulled Thomas aside. You've done well. She'll survive the journey now. We'll move them tomorrow at first light. Tomorrow? Thomas's heart lurched. They'd planned for 5 days. 5 days was what they'd agreed to. Tomorrow is day 4. I said 5 days. Not 5 days and a morning. Marsh's voice was hard. We leave at dawn. My men will be here at sunrise. You'll get your money, and this will be over. After Marsh left, Thomas hurried to the barn. Grace and Hope saw his expression and understood immediately. Tomorrow? Grace's voice was tight. His coming tomorrow? Dawn. We have tonight. That's all. Hope stood, testing her feet. The bandages Thomas had changed that morning were spotted with blood, but she managed to stay upright. I can make it. I'm strong enough. Are you? Thomas looked at her critically. 70 miles to Canada through winter terrain, possibly being chased by men with dogs and guns. Are you really strong enough? I have to be. Hope's voice carried absolute conviction. Because the alternative is going back. And I won't. I'd rather die in the snow trying to reach freedom than die in chains wishing I'd tried. Thomas nodded. Then we go tonight. As soon as it's full dark. What about the guard? Grace asked. Leave Porter to me. That evening, Thomas prepared dinner for Porter. Salt pork, beans, and fresh cornbread. He also added something extra to Porter's coffee, a generous dose of laudanum he'd been saving since Anna's final days. Not enough to kill, but enough to make a young man sleep very, very deeply. Porter ate gratefully, complimented the food, drank his coffee. Within an hour, he was yawning. Within 2 hours, he'd excused himself to the spare room. Within 3 hours, he was unconscious, and would remain so for at least 8 hours. Thomas waited until he was certain Porter was completely out, then moved to the barn. Grace and Hope were already awake, alert, ready. Isaiah had arrived an hour earlier, slipping through the darkness like a ghost, bringing supplies. Heavy coats, sturdy boots that would never fit the women's extraordinary feet, but were better than nothing. Food for the journey. We move now. Isaiah's voice was urgent, fast and quiet. By the time Porter wakes and Marsh realizes they are gone, we need to be across the Ohio and miles into free territory. What about you? Grace looked at Thomas. Are you coming? Thomas had spent 4 days thinking about this question. Thinking about his farm, about Anna's grave on the hill, about the life he'd built and lost and tried to rebuild. Thinking about what came next. No. I'm staying. The 3 of them stared at him. If I disappear with you, Marsh will know I was part of the escape. He'll hunt all of us. But if I'm here when they discover you're gone, if I'm the victim of theft and deception, if I play the role of the foolish farmer who trusted runaway slaves and got robbed for his trouble, you'll take the blame. Isaiah understood immediately. You'll be humiliated, possibly suspected, but not definitively guilty. Not enough for Marsh to arrest you. Just enough to destroy your reputation. Thomas nodded. It's the only way this works. The only way you get enough head start to make it. They'll destroy you. Grace's voice was fierce. They'll take your farm, ruin your name, make you an outcast. They were already going to do that. Thomas smiled without humor. I owe money I can't pay. The farm's lost anyway. At least this way, it's lost for something that matters. Hope crossed the barn, moving carefully on her healing feet, and took Thomas's hands in hers. Her hands were enormous, calloused, scarred from years of field work. They made his hands look like a child's. Mr. Brennan. Thomas. Thank you. For seeing us as people. For risking everything when you didn't have to. For choosing right when it cost you everything. Thomas felt his throat tighten. Just get to Canada. Both of you. Live free. That's all the thanks I need. Isaiah gripped his shoulder. History won't remember this. There'll be no monuments, no records, no recognition. You'll just be the drunk farmer who harbored fugitives and paid the price for his foolishness. That's how they'll tell the story. Good. Thomas met his eyes. Let them tell it that way. I'll know the truth. That's enough. They left at midnight. Thomas watched them disappear into the darkness, Isaiah leading, Grace and Hope following, moving with surprising speed despite Hope's condition. He watched until he couldn't see them anymore, until they were just shadows dissolving into larger shadows, heading north toward the frozen Ohio River and freedom beyond. Then he returned to the house, sat down at his kitchen table, and waited for dawn. Porter woke around 6, groggy and confused. He stumbled out of the spare room, saw Thomas sitting at the table drinking coffee, and immediately looked guilty. I'm sorry. I don't know what. I've never slept so hard. Thomas's face was a mask of fury. The women. They are gone. What? The women. They are gone. I went to the barn this morning to feed them and found nothing. They escaped during the night. While you were sleeping. Porter's face went white. He ran to the barn, confirmed what Thomas already knew, then stood in the empty loft looking like his world had ended. Marsh will kill me. He'll absolutely kill me. He'll kill both of us. Thomas let real fear creep into his voice. We had one job. Keep them secure. And we failed. Marsh arrived 2 hours later with 6 armed men. His face when he saw the empty barn was terrifying. Perfectly controlled, perfectly calm, and absolutely murderous underneath. Explain. One word. Flat. Dangerous. Thomas explained. He'd fed the women at dusk. Porter had dinner and went to sleep early, said he wasn't feeling well. Thomas had assumed Porter was watching the barn. Porter had assumed Thomas was. Somewhere in the confusion of assumptions, the women had slipped away. Thomas had discovered them missing at dawn. It was a weak story, full of holes. Marsh saw through it immediately. You drugged him. Marsh's voice was certain. You drugged Porter, let the women escape, and now you're playing innocent. I did no such thing. Then prove it. Show me the coffee you served. Show me there's no laudanum in your supplies. Thomas did, because he'd disposed of the laudanum bottle days ago, thrown it into the creek where it would never be found. Marsh searched the house anyway, tore through every cabinet and cupboard. Found nothing. No evidence. No proof. Just suspicion and a story that was barely believable but couldn't be definitively disproven. Where did they go? Marsh grabbed Thomas by his shirt, slammed him against the barn wall. Where did you send them? I didn't send them anywhere. Thomas met his eyes. I was sleeping. I'm as shocked as you are. If I find out you helped them, if I discover you were part of this, you'll what? Thomas's voice was steady. Kill me? Arrest me? You have no proof. Just your suspicion. And suspicion isn't enough for a federal charge. Marsh held him there for 10 long seconds. Then he shoved Thomas away, turned to his men. North. They'll head north. Always do. We can still catch them if we move fast. They left at a gallop. 6 riders heading north toward Ohio, toward the river, toward 2 women who had an 8-hour head start and a conductor who knew every hidden path and secret crossing point between Kentucky and freedom. Thomas watched them go. Then he went into his house, sat at the table where Anna used to sit across from him, and allowed himself to feel what he'd been holding back. Relief. Pride. Grief. Terror. All of it at once. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. 2 human beings who'd been property yesterday were free today, or would be if they made it across the river. And he'd been part of that. He'd chosen right even though it cost him everything. Marsh never caught them. Thomas learned this weeks later from rumors that filtered back through town. The slave catchers had tracked them to the river, found evidence of a crossing, but lost the trail on the Ohio side. Some said the women had died in the attempt, that the ice had broken and they'd drowned. Others said they'd made it to a station in Ripley, been hidden by abolitionists, were probably in Canada by now. Nobody knew for sure. They'd simply disappeared, like smoke, like dreams, like hope itself. The consequences for Thomas were exactly what he'd expected. Marsh spread the word that Thomas had helped the runaways escape. No proof, but enough whispers to destroy a reputation. Within a month, no one in Maysville would speak to him. His credit vanished completely. Elias Cobb foreclosed on the farm in April. Thomas didn't fight it. He signed the papers, packed what little he owned, and prepared to leave Kentucky forever. He had nothing. No home, no money, no prospects. But he also had something he hadn't had in 18 months. Self-respect. On his last day, he climbed the hill behind the farmhouse to Anna's grave. He knelt beside the weathered wooden cross and spoke to her the way he'd spoken to her every day since she died. I did something right, Anna. Finally. I helped 2 people escape slavery. It cost me everything, but I'd do it again. I hope you're proud. I hope wherever you are, you know that I tried to be the man you believed I was. He placed his hand on the grave, felt the cold earth beneath his palm, and said goodbye. Then he walked down the hill, climbed onto Bell, and rode north toward Ohio. Toward a future that was uncertain, but at least was his own. Toward a life that wouldn't be easy, but would be honest. He never saw Grace and Hope again. But 3 years later, in 1854, Thomas was working at a lumber mill in Cincinnati when a massive woman walked into the office. She was at least 6.5 feet tall, powerfully built, dressed in the practical clothes of a working woman. She looked at Thomas for a long moment, and Thomas looked back, his heart suddenly racing. Grace? She smiled. The same fierce smile he remembered from that barn in Kentucky. Hello, Thomas. They talked for an hour. Learned each other's stories of the 3 years since that night. Grace told him that Hope had survived, that they'd made it to Canada, that they lived together in a small town outside Toronto. They worked in a lumber camp. Their size and strength made them valuable employees, and for the first time in their lives, they were paid fair wages for their labor. Hope wanted to come, but she's working today. She sent you this. Grace handed him a letter. Inside was a photograph, new technology, expensive, rare. It showed 2 women standing together, both impossibly tall, both smiling with the freedom of people who'd earned their joy. Written on the back, to Thomas Brennan, who gave us our lives. With eternal gratitude, Grace and Hope Freeman. They'd taken Isaiah's last name. Become a family. Found freedom. We heard what happened to you. Grace's voice was gentle. Heard you lost your farm. That they ruined your name. It was worth it. Was it? Grace studied him. You gave up everything. Thomas looked at the photograph in his hands. 2 women who were alive and free because of choices he'd made. Choices that cost him a farm and a reputation, but gave him back something more valuable. His humanity. Yes. It was worth it. Grace reached into her bag and pulled out a cloth bundle. Inside were gold coins. $50. More money than Thomas had seen in years. This is from both of us. It's not enough. It'll never be enough. But it's what we have. Thomas tried to refuse, but Grace's expression stopped him. This isn't charity. This is payment. You gave us our lives. Let us give you a future. He took the money. Not because he needed it, though he did, but because refusing would have diminished what they'd been through together. Would have made it about white savior charity instead of what it really was. Mutual sacrifice. Shared risk. Human beings helping each other survive an inhuman system. Grace stood to leave. She paused at the door. By the way, Isaiah sends his regards. He's still running the railroad. Still moving people to freedom. He wanted you to know that the information you gave Marsh, the false information, probably saved a dozen lives. Marsh wasted months chasing dead ends while real conductors kept working. You did more good than you know. After she left, Thomas sat alone in the small room he rented, holding the photograph and the gold coins, and allowed himself to cry. Not from grief this time. From relief. From the knowledge that his choice had mattered. That 2 lives saved had rippled outward, creating more freedom, more hope, more proof that doing right could change the world even in small ways. He never returned to Kentucky. Never saw Anna's grave again. But he carried her with him in the choices he made, in the person he became. He eventually remarried, started a small carpentry business in Cincinnati, helped fund the Underground Railroad with the money he owned. When the Civil War came, he was too old to fight, but he housed soldiers, fed refugees, did what he could to support the cause of freedom. He died in 1882, 62 years old, surrounded by friends and family who knew him as a kind man, a generous man, a quiet man who'd once done something extraordinary and never spoke about it. His obituary in the Cincinnati newspaper mentioned his carpentry work, his charitable donations, his service to the community. It never mentioned the 2 escaped slaves he'd helped reach freedom 3 decades earlier. But at his funeral, 2 unusually tall women stood at the back of the church. They were elderly now, their hair gray, their faces lined with age. But they stood straight and proud. Free women who'd lived full lives, who'd loved and worked and thrived because one man had chosen mercy over profit 30 years before. After the service, they approached Thomas's widow, placed flowers on his grave, spoke words of gratitude she didn't fully understand because Thomas had never told her the full story. Then they walked away, 2 impossible women who'd once been property and now were free, carrying with them the knowledge that sometimes one person's courage can change everything. The story of Thomas Brennan and the 2 giant sisters never made it into history books. No monuments were erected. No streets were named in their honor. The sealed court records that briefly mentioned 2 Negro women of extraordinary stature were lost in a courthouse fire in 1891. All that remained were whispers, rumors, conflicting accounts that historians would debate for generations. But the truth lived on in other ways. In the descendants of Grace and Hope Freeman, who spread across Canada and eventually returned to America, free people with stories of ancestors who'd walked 60 miles on bleeding feet for freedom. In the small actions of courage that rippled outward from that one choice, inspiring others to take their own risks, make their own sacrifices. Sometimes the most important moments in history aren't the ones recorded in books. Sometimes they're the quiet choices made by ordinary people who decide that doing right matters more than doing easy. Sometimes they are the moments when a broken man finds purpose by helping strangers at the cost of everything he has left. Thomas Brennan was a drunk farmer who lost his wife, lost his son, lost his farm, lost his reputation, and lost everything that society said made a man's life worth living. But in the end, he gained something more valuable. He gained the knowledge that when it mattered most, when the universe tested whether he was still human, he passed. He chose mercy. He chose justice. He chose right. And 2 women lived free because of it. That was his legacy. Not written in history books, but written in the lives of people who breathed free air and raised free children and died free deaths because one man decided their freedom mattered more than his comfort. If you're watching this, take a moment to think about the choices you make when no one's watching. About the moments when doing right costs you something. About whether you'd risk everything for strangers who needed help. The sealed room exists to tell these forgotten stories, to remind us that history isn't just made by famous people doing famous things. It's made by ordinary people making extraordinary choices in impossible situations. What would you have done in Thomas Brennan's position? Would you have helped? Or would you have looked away? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more stories about forgotten acts of courage, about the people history erased but who changed the world anyway, subscribe to The Sealed Room. Hit that notification bell. Share this with someone who needs to know that one person's choice can matter, can ripple outward, can change lives in ways they'll never fully see. Until next time, remember, the most powerful acts of courage are often the ones that go unrecorded, unremembered, unrecognized by everyone except the people whose lives were saved. And sometimes, that's enough.